Welcome to Tuesday, 4:10 p.m. Happy to have you. If you're in this room right now, you already know that we have a reading emergency in our country. 1 in 3 students read on grade level by the time they reach 4th grade, according to the NAEP test. And if you are a student who comes from a historically marginalized group, the odds are even worse for you. That was true before the pandemic, and it's only gotten worse since the pandemic. But I am optimistic about that. Well, I'm optimistic about our ability to find a solution because there is a strong evidence base that tells us what we should be doing to ensure that all kids are strong readers. And I am heartened by the fact that 29 states in our country have passed legislation that requires teachers to shift the way that they've been teaching reading. The other thing to note about states is states are increasingly market makers. They are demanding that the products and services that teachers use in their classrooms are effective, that there's an evidence base that demonstrates that they work. And those are the shifts that I want to talk about today. So whether you are a teacher, an educator, whether you are a policymaker, whether you are sort of a tech product builder, or you are in the sort of government space generally, and the literacy space generally, there is a role for you to play as we support teachers to make the shifts that we're talking about, and as we ensure that the tools that teachers have and that are in front of kids every day are tools that work and help them to be the readers that we believe all children can be. So let's jump into that discussion with this awesome panel. I mentioned that 29 states have adopted science of reading legislation. That means that those states are clear that teachers need to do something different. But this is not a knock on teachers. Teachers have been working hard to do what the system around them has encouraged them to do. And that system is higher ed, it's products and services, it's state education agencies, and it's districts. And we haven't been pointing teachers in the right direction. But as I mentioned, the market is shifting, and we're excited to see that happen. But let's start with teachers. Nakia and Rose, can you all tell us, what have we been asking teachers to do, and what do we want them to do now?
Well, honestly, I think everybody can agree we've been asking teachers to do too much. And so it's wearing so many hats, and obviously also trying to hold teachers accountable for the teaching and learning outcomes. What I think and I noticed is that we really haven't been very precise in what we meant by reading instruction and what teachers need to be doing. Even more shocking, I'm a career changer, is that in teacher prep programs, we weren't training teachers around this evidence base that we've now called the science of reading. And so we shouldn't be shocked by the outcomes that we've gotten. And in so many situations, teachers have had to really search, hunt, and peck for resources to plan a lesson on the day-to-day. It's the reason that we've had the rise of, Teachers Pay Teachers and Pinterest, et cetera, because teachers were hungry for the right kind of resources to support their students. And even when districts provided resources, it was, I would call it like a smorgasbord of choose your own adventure, right? Which meant that as a teacher, you're gonna be spending hours trying to plan a lesson with all of these resources that have kind of been thrown out at you. I think what we're now trying to ask teachers to do is that with the support of high quality instructional materials, that we want teachers to be able to have some place that they know that there is a coherent, aligned to the science of reading curriculum that they can use day to day for their instruction so that they can focus on the real pieces that they need, which is knowing the children and knowing how to adjust. I don't like the whole implementing with fidelity. I like to say implement with integrity, because that means you're using your professional judgment. And so we can take some of the cognitive load off of teachers towards making sure that now that we've started doing this professional development around the science of reading, that we don't then put it all on teachers to make that come alive in the classroom. You have to have the instructional materials that those concepts are embedded in the material so that teachers know that what they're doing is actually going to be the right work, the right focus for students. So, and that's not easy. Like, I'm sitting here like it's Pollyanna. I've got the battle scars to show for it in multiple districts. It's hard, it's a hard shift and change, but I think that what we're now seeing is that we want to make sure that we not have only the phonics conversation, but the knowledge building curricula, and frankly, you know, it takes a strong set of coherent curricula to meet all of the goals that we know align with the science of reading.
Yeah, Rose, what would you add?
What she said. Well, no, just two other things to add, I think, which is, I'm really glad you brought up the knowledge building. I do think if you haven't heard it already in any other science of reading conversations you've had over the last couple of days, science of reading does not equal phonics, right? It equals evidence-based practices, which includes everything from knowledge building to reading voluminously, to use John Schuffelbein's word from the 90s, for those of you that maybe think it was invented recently. Science of reading is a set of practices across learning sciences that we know work. So the tools and curriculum that we want to give is one part of it. But as Dr. Julia Lindsay has said recently, unless we make the science of reading practices in the classroom that we're really, the teaching moves, easy enough for teachers to step into and to try, whether in a curriculum or from professional development, we're never going to be able to make that small group instruction that was the original idea, right? You know, differentiate in small group. We're never going to be able to make that precise enough to be meeting the goals of science of reading. So part of the reason the ubiquitous A to Z framework and small group and guided reading have been so successful is that they were simple to implement. And you have to help teachers not say everything you've done for the last decade doesn't work, but instead of this, do that. Mm-hmm. Instead of using these kinds of leveled readers, use decodables. Mm-hmm. And some of those shifts can be explained in ways that have the science base behind them, but feel accessible and respectful, and you can do the next day. You don't have to go on Pinterest.
Yep.
Both of you have talked about curriculum and products, and so my next set of questions are for Penny, you, and Nakia after that. I get pitched around different ed tech products all the time. Companies call me and they say, I want you to take a look at my product. And recently I had an experience with a math product that had a very cute new AI bot, because everything has a new AI bot. And when I dug into the substance, the math pedagogy wasn't correct. And when I asked who on your team has expertise in math pedagogy, the answer was no one. And that's a problem. It's a problem for children when that is the case. So I'm curious, Nakia and Penny, from you all, and Penny, you can start. When people are coming to you with new products and services that claim to be aligned to the science of reading, what kinds of questions are you asking? What are you looking for? And how can people here who are interested in helping kids learn to read be a viable sort of product for your state or your district?
Sure, so I think from a state agency perspective, we look at a three-legged stool. So you have policy, you have money, and you have implementation. All three of those have to be in place and strong, and if one is weak, then the stool falls over. So for us, we have our Literacy Success Act, which lays out very clear requirements in terms of our expectations. Part of what I would say from a vendor perspective, it is unacceptable to lobby to try to get your product into a bill. That is not good for kids because the competitive market allows for products to get better and for us to evaluate fairly and accurately and appropriately what the best tool is for different learners in different times and spaces. So we have to protect the policy making. We also have to ensure that there is funding, and there is plenty of funding right now. I actually think because this is kind of a massive shift happening in our country and necessary, there will continue to be funding from states even after ESSER is over. This is not, the prioritization on literacy is not going away. So then it's about how do you think through when you're talking to a vendor or someone who has a product, like how are you pricing that? What are the outcomes? How have you looked at the efficacy of your product? What would you compare it to? And more importantly, from an implementation perspective, how does that fit into the strategy that we are doing? Not how do we figure out how to make your product work for us? How does your product work for what we are building and doing? And for us in Tennessee, it's Reading 360 is our big kind of literacy initiative, which Nakia knows well. But it's a comprehensive approach. So it's looking at requiring our ed preps to redo how they teach teachers how to teach reading. That is in a law. There are now ways in which we teach teachers differently. And 30,000 teachers have gone through some kind of science of reading training. 5,000 in the secondary spaces, because we've got a lot of kids in middle and high school who cannot read on grade level, and we cannot forget them, right? So I think those are just two examples on top of the supports we've used for professional development, high quality instructional materials, et cetera. I say all of that because there's plenty of space and room for outside providers to help us move the work forward. The competition component actually isn't as important as ensuring your product is really, really strong. And so we evaluate that by taking experts both in the department, in our school districts, and frankly in higher ed and kind of, I think in the broader market, who are no longer attached to any one company to say, you know, David Steiner, like, what do you think about this? Can you go look at this? Or we have a literacy council of experts who will go through the products and tell us all the things that are wrong with it. And we will not sign a contract until those are fixed, because ultimately, I've got 1 million kids in Tennessee. My responsibility that I've committed to their parents is that I've done the due diligence to ensure the products will get their kids to read on grade level, not by 3rd grade, by 1st grade. 3rd grade's too late. So I think that's some of the things that we do, but I just want to reiterate, the politics is very hard. And so it is easy to stand up here and say you just hold a high bar, and then people are like, it's wonderful because we all want kids to read. And like, it's great. But I mean, I've been sued like 7 times, right? Like that's real. Or, you know, people do like smear campaigns. Like the tactics, because you want to make a buck, supersedes our ethical and moral responsibility that all of our kids can be on grade level and can function well and successfully at their highest potential in an economy which is good for all of us. And so until we actually have a moral imperative to hold the line, there have to be more people who are willing to take the hits so that we can use the data and information that we build and understand and grow, and all the experts that we bring in to be able to hold that line politically. But that's just, I mean, that's very, very real in all the states, and it's why it's not moving as fast as it should to actually solve the problem.
Amen. You know, I think that to the point for all of the vendors and partners who want to be a part of the solution, it's got to be bigger than a profit, you know, effort. It's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be about the overarching mission of literacy in our schools for greater society. And if that's true, then business practices aren't going to look like Penny getting sued 7 times over the RFP, right? That when we are, as a district, when people are coming and pitching, and those of us who work in districts, you have these budgets, people know, you know, what your line items are for instructional materials. I immediately start thinking about and looking for the third-party validation. What is the evidence of impact? You all may be hearing more about now the outcomes-based contracting, right? That we are now like, it's not good enough to just say as a headline, it's aligned to the science of reading, whatever that means, right? It means that you actually have to demonstrate that the products or services that you're delivering or wanting to deliver to a district actually make an impact for kids. So for me, I think it is about the evidence-based third-party validation. Places like Ed Reports have really helped us, you know, to have people who are rigorously evaluating different curricula, and there's multiple, it's not just Ed Reports, but there's multiple independent groups who have done this kicking of the tires, if you will. And I think that helps us as district leaders. What we need now is for the broader, I call it mass market, to really understand that everything that has science of reading stamped on it, you know, phonics on steroids, or just inserting phonics into a flawed program, that isn't it. And we need for really the vendor partners to help us with the broader marketing of what do we mean by science of reading. Because districts and states and schools, we can't spend our money on marketing, right? People get upset with us if we say we're gonna spend our money on a PR campaign. That'll get you in the news quick. We need for the people who have budgets And the superintendent of LA Unified was brilliant in a session I was in yesterday, was talking about this. We need for the people who have the budgets to be able to educate the broader community. Because right now it is silly season. Penny's right, the politics. I mean, we have people, I came from Tennessee, I'm in Georgia right now in a district, and I'm transitioning to a nonprofit that really is all about evidence-based, because we have folks who inject their own personal ideologies into what should be a nonpartisan or bipartisan conversation. Like, if we all want kids to read, then let's get on board. I mean, we are right now having people write letters in Gwinnett, the district that I'm transitioning from, who are pushing back against one of the most highly rated curricula that we were able to pilot. And it's because we haven't done enough, and I say we, I'm looking at partners, those who have the money, haven't done enough to help educate the broader community around what is it that the why behind these shifts, and explaining to people what science of reading is. And yes, balanced literacy and readers workshop may have worked for the child who was going to learn to read no matter what, but it's not working for everybody. It's not working for most. That's the emergency. Right. Only 1 in 3 is who it's working for. That's just not good enough. And so we really need help and support around being able to educate the broader community as to the why behind what we're doing.
You talked a lot about partners, and I agree there's so much space for partners, but all of the products and services have to make sense to a teacher, and a teacher needs to know how to use them on a day-to-day basis in service of the kids in front of her. And so, Rose and Nick, I'm curious from you all, being partners to school systems, how have you felt this shift to science of reading and the demand for evidence-based products in your work?
So, we've been focused on the science of reading for 40 years now and doing real research in schools and districts across the nation. And we are seeing a change. We are seeing districts looking at the research and not just saying, oh, good, there's research, but asking questions about the research. Is it deep? Is it rigorous? Is it large sample sizes? And talking to their peers as well in other districts and saying, what was your experience with these products? I'm so glad you used the term partnership.
Yes.
We die a little bit when someone calls us a vendor because it is a partnership. And we approach it as not a short-term partnership, but a long-term partnership. And part of that is setting expectations for the partner and for all the stakeholders within the school. I think what's now available is data to hold people accountable, and data both in terms of student outcomes, but if you think about it, you have to work upstream from those expectations around student outcomes. You look at product usage, which was sort of the one thing people looked at for a long time, but there are so many other data elements and things that can be evaluated along the way to say, are we on track? Are we making the kind of progress that we know we can make based upon the research? So usage is one, and then are students using it enough? Is it constantly looking at the data and making adjustments? And are teachers embracing it? Teacher satisfaction, I think, often gets overlooked. And all of those elements along that value chain and that change management chain have to be looked at.
And data around that has been rare, so it's exciting to know that we can collect that. Rose, what would you add?
Yeah, I mean, I just add, for a company like Scholastic that's been around for 103 years, we're making this pretty significant shift from being a publisher to being a partner, and from what's been, incredibly engaging materials that can be age appropriate. We know that the motivational research is also part of the field, but we need to move from just that idea of engagement or usage to outcomes. So hearing that it's, that's going to become part of the decision-making process. And I think we need to balance this idea as well that there can be innovation with that, right? So,
That's right.
And I'm glad you mentioned Ed Reports, because of course one of those gateways is ease of use. So where we're able to innovate and keep making the products and services better, from all of the users, from kids themselves, being active in their own learning, and caring about what they're doing and the data that they're getting. Self-efficacy is a huge part of what it means to actually be a reader, and certainly even at first grade. So I think that shift from engagement to outcome is one that we see happening as we talk broadly to states and districts. And frankly, we're in a little bit of an unusual position because we don't have a core curriculum, so our supplemental tools really need to serve very specific targeted purposes. in pretty unique ways, but also follow the data.
Kunjan, can I just add, because I think there is a really important distinction between vendor and partner, and just, there's a lot of Tennessee connections here, right? So let's take Scholastic as an example. So for us, we have a strategy, and that is the strategy we are running. What is unhelpful, and when I'm thinking about a vendor, is someone who's trying to help me understand the best way that they can add to a strategy, versus they are part of a team that we are moving forward together. And so like for Scholastic, over 500,000 books every summer go to our students, right, in rural communities across Tennessee, and that is part of the partnership. One of the things that has happened is, what are the needs? Which students need home libraries? What are the skills they're working on? And the first summer, the books weren't actually aligned to what we needed. We had really good, productive conversations. I'm opening a book with my 7-year-old this last summer, and it's exactly what she needed. They were on grade level. There were instructions of what you can do as a parent, how you can make it fun, and those were aligned to the decodables that we had already sent to families, and we had 100,000 of those go out. And so that was an example of a vendor that we worked with that became a partner because it was part of a unified strategy of cohesion. Yes, and I don't hand out.
We didn't even
freely.
prepare that.
Yeah, I know. I was like, you know what? You can just
the
truth. And we shout that out.
Let's talk about it. We made, we did make a mistake the first year.
Yeah, that's right.
They weren't quite right. We went back. And then the other thing we did was provide those materials to teachers.
That's
so we were
exactly
building the sort of triangle between the child reading the book, what teachers knew the child was reading at home, and what was accessible to parents in English and Spanish that we could help families do. So.
And that changes everything. And I know you're doing incredible work in Nashville. And so it's this idea of, it's not like the school and the state and legislators and parents.
It's alignment.
It has to be aligned. And so the parent has to get books that they know what to do at home with their kids. They can talk to the teachers about it. That's aligned to what teachers are using in classrooms. And everybody's rowing in the same direction. That is really hard to do. And if you're coming in, you have to be part of that conversation, but you also have to understand the strategy at the district level or the state level in order to be able to say, this is how what I am building can help what you are doing, not something that you can add on that's just one more checklist for a teacher. And that includes tutoring. I know tutoring is a new popular thing, but they should all work together.
You're talking about everyone rowing in the same direction, which I think, as a former state education bureaucrat, I totally agree with, and it's a hard thing to achieve. What makes it even harder in this context is the political context in which we work, particularly in recent years. And I don't have to tell you all, but teachers are being asked to share their lesson plans. Districts are getting FOIA'd for all kinds of records. There's confusion about whether textbooks or books kids are reading have CRT embedded in them somehow. So I'm curious, Nick and Penny, from you all to start, but others should jump in. What advice do you have for district leaders or for state leaders who are trying to thread the needle on the politics and make sure kids are still getting what they need?
Yeah,
I'm glad that's your question.
I'm glad to start. I've watched so many education board meetings over the past few years, and I'm always so struck and honestly disappointed in the kind of dialogue we see going on. And it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of bridging a divide and finding common ground and bringing people together to find a solution. But I think we have such a long way to go. It is such a polarized conversation right now. And I'm always reminded of, the challenges that teachers and administrators have in managing those conversations and bringing it back to the needs of students. This is about literacy. It's about math achievement. It's not about cultural issues. If you boil it down, it's what do these students need in order to have the kind of productive conversations, to have the critical thinking skills that they can have these conversations in the future. And again, it gets to partnership.
Yeah.
If we can help align all of those stakeholders with districts, with states, that eventually brings people together into a common understanding of the need for the kind of strategies that districts and states are developing.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard. We're in Tennessee. We have laws around this over the last 3 or 4 years. I think It's especially hard when you are an educator, and I will always identify as an educator first before anything. A mom first, then educator. But I should say that for the record if my kids are watching. But love you. But I think that really it's about not losing focus, right? And so part of what I find so frustrating in the political conversation is whatever side of the debate that you're on, it's just distracting from the work. And so ultimately, when we are having conversations either in a hearing or behind the scenes with legislators who disagree deeply and very viscerally sometimes with one another, ultimately we still want this child in front of me to learn to read as soon as possible. That is something that we share. And so we start with that value, and we don't always get to the same outcome in terms of process, frankly. That's usually where it breaks down. But what we are able to do is say, look, what works in Nashville might not work in Lake County. Got it. But what we can say is this is the minimum standard. This is local control. Here is a process where you as a local community can make decisions about which texts you want in front of your kids. What I am not willing to bend on is this floor getting any lower. Like that is the thing that we are going to have to agree on. And so what we need to do is just keep the floor getting higher and higher and higher, and saying the minimum expectation this year needs to be higher the year after and higher the year after, and help people stair step up. And if you don't like this text and you love this text, as a local community, you need to have those debates and conversations, because we have a very diverse state in Tennessee, and Memphis and, Crockett County are going to have very different types of conversations, and they might choose the same text, and oftentimes they do. But the way in which they have that process and bring parents along and community members along and activists along so people feel comfortable, it's not going to look the same. And one of the things I would challenge folks on, and we have these arguments in my own house, is they might not pick the same books and pathways that you wanted because it's not your belief. And that might make you really mad and make you feel a certain kind of way about a certain community, but it doesn't mean they're wrong or right. It means that they are different, and their process and what they choose and what they want to teach is going to be different here versus there. Ultimately, are kids reading rich texts? Do they understand them? Are they reading on grade level? Is there a transparent public process? And are we keeping the bar really, really high and being true and honest with ourselves about how we are teaching students, what we are teaching students, and ensuring that no matter where you live, you're hitting that minimum floor that's very, very high for kids. And that's uncomfortable if you feel very strongly about one thing and someone else feels very strongly about something else. But if we just argue, we're going to end up with 36% of kids on grade level year after year for the last 40 years plus, and it's just unacceptable.
Yeah, I'll add to this in terms of the politics. It's been brutal, right, since the pandemic. It's been brutal. It's real talk to be in districts, in schools, and having to sit at those 7-hour school board meetings where we're arguing about minutia and foolishness. It's been very difficult, and people have absolutely, at different times, we've lost focus on the children. And frankly, in the moment that we're in coming out of the pandemic, we have to focus more than ever on the children, holistically, right? Because we just got through a shared national trauma. And I know what it's like for my 48-year-old self. I can't imagine what it would be like for an 8-year-old who just lived through what we've gone through over the past 3 years. And so as we think about this conversation around literacy and the shifts that we need to make, it does require courageous leadership. Me and my former superintendent in Tennessee, Hamilton County, Chattanooga, we used to have a saying that we're here to do a job, not keep a job. And so you have to be willing to know that sometimes the messenger will be sacrificed. The person who leads the change will not be the person who's there to see it all the way through the implementation. And you have to be able to lean into a window of opportunity. I see one of my Hamilton County peeps out here, and the reason that we were able to launch a new literacy curriculum, people thought we were crazy. We did it in the fall of 2020. We launched a new literacy curriculum in the fall of 2020. We sent teachers home that summer with the workbooks, and we did the training, all of this. You all know what was going on in the spring and the summer of 2020. But what we said is, if we're going to have this disruption of the pandemic and we're having to go online and we don't know if we're going to be able to stay in person, well, we certainly have to have the ties of high quality instructional materials, because else it's going to be, I won't say the word, a crap show, that's what I'll say, right? For what needs to accomplish. And we leaned into that moment, and our teachers went with us. They got it. They were like, you're right. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. We're not gonna have the tie of consistent curriculum. And it had to be a superintendent, you know, I was deputy at the time, stepping up to say, we're gonna lead this change, even as we have all of this other operational concern. And it made a difference for kids. When the testing came back online that spring, our third grade reading went up in the spring of 2021. No one could believe it. It's because we stepped out and kept focused on kids and tried to figure out what was the best way to keep kids learning. So the politics right now, and you know, as I transition into nonprofit world, you know, people have asked, you know, how am I feeling about that? And I'm like, well, I'm feeling bittersweet. Because it's, you know, the work is in public K-12. The vast majority of our students are going to be educated in public K-12 systems in this country. But I will say this, as a person who is like Penny, I am a serious educator. And to be in situations right now where we're talking about everything except teaching and learning, that's demoralizing. That's demoralizing for educators, that the work is just being hijacked versus the mission that we have and the way we need to serve kids. So I would say I hope that we all go back to our communities and figure out how do we get this conversation to get back on children and elect the right people to lead the work.
This is my last question. I'd love for everyone to say a few words about it. I hope that in 10 years we all get together again and have double the number of students reading on grade level or even greater. And I'm curious from your perspective, what makes you optimistic that that reality can be achieved and what keeps you up at night? Let's just go down the line.
The current momentum around the science of reading makes me believe that we are now actually affecting change. The combination of that and data to show the kind of progress we're making, if we can stay focused on that, and we can stay focused on it at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, that makes me believe that over time we're actually finally going to make a difference. Well, I always think about the title of these sessions and the word crisis and emergency. It's the word we've been using for 40 years, and it's not the right word. It is a long, sustained effort now that we have to make sure we don't lose focus on. And I do think that the momentum right now is something we just have to make sure we don't lose.
Well, I'm sure there's many of them in the room. It's teachers that make me feel optimistic. I think teachers truly believe, I also started my career in the classroom, and they truly believe in kids. That's why they're there, and they want to do the right thing by kids. You know, one of the things we didn't talk about is how a lot of teachers are feeling about this shift, and you know, so many of them are feeling guilty, confused. You talked about them patchworking things together. I have such faith in teachers wanting to do the right thing and caring about the kids that are right in front of them. So that gives me hope. And I even read just in a tiny little good piece of news in 74 this week that there's a 6% increase in folks wanting to go into the teaching profession, which, given everything over the last 3 years, I was
Amen.
like, yes. So I'm going to take that little chink of hope and take it to the bank for teachers.
Yeah, you know, I'll start with, you know, where I ended in terms of the thing that keeps me up at night is that we are all exhausted. That is to say, the adults, we're exhausted, right? And now is the time that we need to find the energy to lean into this work on behalf of kids. And so I worry about where do we find that energy, right? How do we keep it going? How do we keep the hope and optimism going? And how do we make sure that we continue to pour into the well-being of all of the folks in the system? I mean, in fact, education is a human enterprise. And how do we build more humane schools and systems, right, that we're able to really support the whole child, the whole person, the whole teacher, so that we can sustain this work in a good way. Like Nick, what I feel encouraged by is that this conversation that we're talking about, and I think it's finally, hopefully, it's going to cross over beyond the circles of just those of us who are kind of in the education inner circle and start to spill out into a broader community conversation. Because ultimately, you know, as Penny talked about alignment, I mean, the alignment has to be in a broader, bigger community societal alignment around this. It can't just be, you know, state policymakers, district leaders, school leaders and teachers talking about this.
Academics.
Right, academics talking about this. It's got to be everybody. Because what we need in terms of really improving outcomes for kids, it really, you know, as I've said all the time, children only spend 20% of their time in schools. The 80% is out in the community, and there are a lot of needs and barriers that have to be removed for us, even if we get everything right around the science of reading, needs and barriers that have to be removed for children and families to be successful. So I think about that momentum and hoping that the next phase of it means that we have a bigger community conversation and people starting to align resources and really talking about how do we build a society that's set up for children and families to succeed.
I think what keeps me up at night is the lack of a coherent strategic national vision right now. And that's, I mean, just we have districts, we've got states, but it's still piecemeal. And so we have been spending the last several days and probably into tomorrow talking about innovation and being bold and reimagining. But it is like saying we have this science of reading and we're dumping the water out and it's going in a whole bunch of different directions. And so it doesn't mean that we're all doing the same thing in the same way at the same time. But what is the vision? Like, what is it we're trying to accomplish for what purpose? What are the strategies that work in states and in districts and in schools, in community partners, for families? What does that, and that's on the vertical. On the horizontal, what does that mean for ed preps? What does that mean for our universities who are building folks to go into ed prep? What does that mean for our community partners? We are not all on the same page. And before we can reimagine education, we can't even get science of reading in all of our school systems. It's really, really hard. So it keeps me up at night because there has to be some way in which, as a country, we have a direction we are all moving and people understand their unique value proposition in that direction. They understand their role and how they can contribute to the outcome we all want. But until we have that clarity across the board, I think that we are going to continue to move very quickly and with urgency, but not necessarily in the same direction like we could. What keeps me optimistic are kids. I mean, if you have not sat in a kindergarten classroom in the last 3 months of your life, you are missing out. Because it is, I always say the first day of school is too late. It's already too late, right? They've already started, the curriculum's there, like now we're still in catch-up mode. But imagine this August, you have a whole new group of kids coming in, and you've got kids you've already served, and they are sitting there and they're just waiting. Every single one of them, no matter how they come in, whatever it is, they are ready for you. And there is no way to look at a child, no matter where you are, and not feel better about the world and optimistic about the future. And ideally, a deep sense of personal responsibility to get it right for them. And so I think spending more time with those who we are here to serve and feeling like you are part of it. I go to a soccer game with my kids. I don't know the kids on the other team. They better not score on my daughter. She's a goalie. You know, like I'm there for it. And I was like, I'm responsible for all of you. And that's going to Kroger or the grocery store. I'm responsible for you. And I think we all have to feel some level of shared responsibility in order for us all to come together and want to subscribe to some kind of national vision. So it's possible.
I love that.
If we talk about kids.
I have loved this. Thank you all so much for being here. As we wrap up, I just want to remind us about teachers. We've talked a lot about them, but the shift in a classroom is a massive shift. It is monumental. And when we worked in Louisiana, we helped teachers across our state change the curriculum they were using in math and in reading, and we would go around and help teachers think about how to make that change. And for a teacher who's been using certain tools, operating in a certain way, believing she was doing the right thing, making that shift is a personal shift. And it is one that requires learning new things, applying new skills, and improving over time. And our support of schools and teachers needs to be sustained in the way Nick mentioned. This is a decades-long fight, and I hope that every single one of us, whether you are an investor, you are thinking about whether the product you're investing in actually works for children. If you are in government, that you're thinking about how do you take on the mantle of responsibility that Nakia and Penny described and take responsibility for the experience that your children have. And if you're a product, a service, or a partner, you are thinking about how to fit yourself into the vision of the district and the state in which you're operating so that you can be additive and be moving in the same direction as the partners that you're trying to serve. We really hope you've enjoyed today. We're here to answer questions if you want to stick around. We're keeping you probably from a happy hour, so don't let us hold you anymore. Have a great evening, and thanks for being here.